Hello, so it is time for us to go over our final assignment with each other. You are going to be doing a comparative analysis. So, the first assignment that you started with was a visual analysis. Um, it was just you looking at the visual design elements, size, composition, value, color, lines, shapes, all of those kinds of things. And you all did a great job with it. The second assignment that you are finishing up, the contextual analysis, so looking at a comic book and the historical, political, social context that inspired that particular comic book. So now, for your third assignment, you are going to be doing a comparative analysis, um, which is different than anything that you've done thus far this semester. Now, before I begin, um, I say this a lot in my other class, but I want to say it here. We would typically be having this discussion face to face as a group, talking each other through it. I would be asking very guided questions to try to elicit a certain response or answer out of you to help this be more student centered. And unfortunately, I don't think that we are going to be able to do that. So I have taken a heavier hand in explaining this prompt and giving you some information before you begin. Um, Last semester, whenever we did this with horror films, I was very. I sat back quite a bit. Students chose their own horror film families um, and worked together, and I didn't give really any direction at all. But for this particular assignment, I wanted to take some of the feedback that you all have given me and be a little bit more controlling, and at least at the beginning, to make sure to nudge you in the right direction. So, we'll go ahead and begin. As always, you see the due dates up here at the top. So you don't have a long time to submit your topic proposal, but all I'm having you do this time is listing me the comic book that you want to choose, giving me a thesis statement that you might use, and listing 2 or 3 things that you want to discuss. So I'm not doing anything too extensive this time with your topic proposal. And then you have a little bit of time, you have a little bit of break between this Friday and next Friday when your first draft is due. So I know these past 2 weeks have been crazy. So hopefully after this Friday, we can breathe for a second. So what you'll be doing for this comparative analysis, you'll be taking 2 comic book characters. This is wrong here, that needs to be changed. 2 comic book characters, and you'll be comparing them. You won't be seeing who is going to win a fight. That's not going to happen because, well, quite frankly, in the comic book, Wolverine defeats Hulk. So that's not what you'll be doing. But you will be comparing them in maybe their backgrounds, their values, costume, even stereotypes, what they stand for, their morals, all of those kinds of elements as well. So your 3 options for essay topic: the Hulk and Wolverine, Luke Cage and Steel. I'm very excited about this one. And then Captain Marvel and Wonder Woman. So, let me go ahead and go over a little bit of the outline that you'll be doing. There's just a natural outline that you'll be doing. So far, you've been working with inductive, deducting, and causal argumentation. So with your causal, remember, it was very much straight lines. Event X caused event Z which might have been, there was a lot of back and forth between um, the context and then the comic book, and it all moved pretty well from one direction to another. It was a very just natural type of outline. Start with the context, go to how that's proved in the actual comic book. So for here, it's a little bit different. It still is very, very organized, but you'll be working with some different models and some different outlines. So you have two options to choose from, and I will go over these um, a little bit here, but you do have a textbook. These explanations are available in your textbook, and I will post an infographic on Moodle for you to look at as well to explain this a little bit further. So you will be using the Toulmin model or the Rogerian model here to outline your essay. So um, here's what they both do. They both introduce the topic, they make a claim, they then list all of the evidence for why you believe your claim is valid, what evidence from research that you have that validates your claim. So, where they start to diverge after that is they talk about counter arguments. So, they go from making a claim to arguing for the claim. Then they address counter arguments, so those arguments that are against their claim. Now, in that portion right there, so they're looking at counter arguments. The Toulmin model, this really isn't the best way to say it, but truthfully, it fits the attitude of it. The Toulmin model is all about asserting dominance. The Toulmin model sees really nothing in value from other counter arguments, and it's very much an attitude of shut you down. Whereas a Rogerian model, that's all about building bridges. So a Rogerian model is all about, so and so makes a really good point. Here are some strengths of that point, but hey, here's why my argument is still superior to this counter argument. So Toulmin is all about there's not really a lot of cross comparing in terms of sharing in strengths. It's very much your argument is weak. Rogerian says your argument has strengths, but it is weaker than mine. In general, that's what those two are doing. So it's not really. These two models are much more about attitude than they are about outline. So something that I've tried to do here is give you a bit of a step-by-step, which goes along with these two models up here, the Toulmin model and the Rogerian model. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to familiarize yourselves with these characters. So likely most of you know who most of these characters are. You have seen them in pop culture somewhere. Luke Cage, 2-season show on Netflix. Captain Marvel and Wonder Woman came out very recently with movies. Wolverine, good grief. We've had several movies on Wolverine and Logan. So you know several of these characters. But if you don't, just go ahead and familiarize yourselves with them. This would be a good time to just Google Steel. Type it into Google. I should have known better than that. I should have known that that was going to happen. So, Google Steel. Sometimes I forget that Google isn't in the same mindset as me. This is a great time, though, to go to Wikipedia, read up on the character. So before you decide exactly what it is you want to choose, maybe just Google each of these characters and see what piques your interests. Um, I would prefer you not cite Wikipedia, although it is a great place to start. And you can scroll down here, um, and you can see some of the references down here. Um, so that would be one place to start. Just familiarize yourselves with those characters. What you need to do once you decide to select, so let's say, for instance, you decide to select Captain Marvel and Wonder Woman. You need to figure out how those characters, how they're similar, but then also how they're different as well. So in this particular instance, Captain Marvel and Wonder Woman, they are both, um, in their own way, feminist superheroes. You will find as you look at these two superheroes, there are various opinions on them and how they represent women. Maybe I should say that. I shouldn't say they're both feminist superheroes, but they do represent women and they portray women, um, in their own ways. You have a lot of people. I think the general consensus is that Captain Marvel is more feminist than Wonder Woman, but again, that's an opinion, that's a claim. If you Google Captain Marvel versus Wonder Woman, you will see several headlines that just conflict against each other. So it's refuted. Um, so you would go through how they're similar, how they're different. Their origin stories are different. Talking about Captain Marvel and Wonder Woman, their origin stories are very different. Their costumes are very different. And actually, if you go on to talk about Captain Marvel and Wonder Woman, you will find that costume is actually, in design, is a really big point to make about feminism and representation of women in these comic books. So, and especially who their audience is. Um, anyway, that's another conversation that we can have. Um, so, what you will do after you familiarize yourselves with these characters, after you do a brief comparison, how they're the same, how they're different, then what you will do is you will argue that somehow, in some way, one of these characters in your pair, so some way that either Hulk or is superior to Wolverine, or Wolverine is superior to Hulk. So you'll be looking at these characters, comparing them, and then you'll be arguing that one is greater or superior than the other, better somehow. This really all happens in an introduction before you really begin writing. Really, the bulk of your paper is going to be number 4 and 5 here. So you'll be listing all the evidence that supports your claim, and then for number 5, you'll refute all your counter arguments. So, and again, here at number 5, this is really where you see a separation between Toulmin and Rogerian, because whenever you get to number 5, at the end of your paper, you might either be shutting down all of these counter arguments, not really looking to have a conversation about them, just this is weak, mine is more valid, let's move on. Or in the Rogerian model, it would be, hey, I see some strengths there. It is weak in this area, mine is more valid. Looking much more to have a conversation with each other. So again, a claim that I want to make, something I want to make sure that you know, your claim is not to settle who would win a fist fight. I know I said this at the beginning, but I want to repeat it now to make sure this is clear. Repetition is great. It's not to settle a fist fight. However, you are in some way arguing that one superhero is quote unquote better than another. So, for instance, I give you some example thesis statements that you can use. Um, you can use these, you can rephrase these, add on. Um, this is me starting to have a heavier hand to make sure that we're right on track since we have less time for the process now. So for instance, with the Hulk and Wolverine, your claim could be that one is more animalistic than another. With Luke Cage and Steel, your claim could be that one defies stereotypes more than another. With Captain America and Wonder Woman, your claim that one is a more ideal icon for feminism than another. So, um, the example, I'm going to come back to these. I have some sources I want to show you. So we will come back to this. The gist here is you're not picking who is going to win a fist fight. So these examples here that I have, one is from a student from last semester, and the other is actually an introduction that I gave to help teach this prompt. So remember last semester, which is where the student's example was taken, we did horror films. And this particular students group, they chose the Insidious franchise. So it was a group of 3. They did Insidious Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3. And then each one of them argued that their installment of the Insidious franchise was more effective than another. So you see the student in their introduction, their thesis statement, I have underlined for you. It reads, while each production attempts to capture the fact that darkness is a safe haven for evil, light is the home of good, and red foreshadows confrontations with malevolent spirits. Insidious Chapter 3 most effectively displays the dichotomy between them through a series of images and dialogue amongst the characters. So, we could probably revise this introduction and this thesis statement, but for our purposes, and me kind of showing you this is an example a student has given, it's effective. The student is very clear on this particular movie, Insidious Chapter 3, is the most effective. And then you'll see, so this is really the claim right here. It's most effective. But then we kind of go into displays the dichotomy between them through a series of images and dialogue amongst the characters. Whenever you read this, you can expect that the author is going to be talking about images and dialogue. Those are the 2 key points that the student talked about. I have an example up here that I kind of created to talk about it. Again, this is the movie example, though. This isn't necessarily a comic book example, although I will try to upload one for you if you find that helpful. So I talk about there are 3 portrayals of Joker, Jack Nicholson, Mark Hamill, and Heath Ledger, and then my thesis statement read, while each production attempts to capture the essence of the psychopathic villain, the Joker in The Dark Knight most effectively embodies chaos in its depiction of insanity, as evident in his intensity, his origins, and his physical appearance. Now, your thesis doesn't have to be quite this lengthy. Eventually, by the end of your writing process, I would like to push you to write a more sophisticated thesis statement, but for now, something like this will do. The essay is going to be 6 to 8 double-spaced pages. I need to correct this as well. I forgot to correct that. This was going to be another multimodal assignment, but due to your access to technology, likely stress that we're all dealing with, I have moved away from multimodality. Now we're just going to do double-spaced paper essay. Plus, it also gives you that practice again with working with essay writing rather than PowerPoint designing. So, something that I wanted to go over with you. So, to help you, I have given you a source for each topic that you could choose with those characters to help you. So, um, with Hulk and Wolverine, you have a PDF here of a chapter from this book, so Superhero Ethics, 10 Comic Book Heroes. Now, one thing that this book does that I like, this is if you do Hulk and Wolverine, this is probably going to be the source that is most direct, directly related to what you'll be talking about. So, I have already downloaded this particular PDF. It's right here is the PDF labeled Hulk versus Wolverine. And you'll pull that up and you will see this chapter right here. So, right in the opening line, you can get a sense of something that this is going to talk about. They have superhuman qualities, but they take the form as these beasts, these monsters, these animals in a way. So, this source is available for you. For Steel, Luke Cage versus Steel. There is a Google book out there with a key chapter that you will need. So just some background on Steel before I read this to you. Steel goes into Metropolis as a replacement for Superman when Superman dies. Luke Cage is in New York. He is in Harlem. And so talking about the idea of well, let me just read this figure 6.6. The arrival of Steel as a replacement Superman at first suggests little change, meaning typical portrayals of black superheroes at this time. As he emerges from the rubble of the inner city, the hero is shadowed, muscular, and snarling, while the initial impression thus casts back to the 1970s into figures like Luke Cage. The hero's journey to heroism ultimately created a humanized individual who is not defined only by his race. So, throughout this chapter, this is something that you can look at as well. Which, actually, to give you a little bit more background on Steel, I am going to also give you this particular source as well that gives you a little bit about John Henry Irons, particularly in this paragraph right here. So I will upload that for you so that way if you go with Steel and Luke Cage, you can get more background on Steel and the cultural significance of Steel. For you. So that's one for you. Now, so here you have two books. For here, I give you a blog. The reason I did that is because depending on what direction, this topic is fairly broad. Fairly broad. Once you go into that, if you decide to choose Captain Marvel or Wonder Woman, you might decide to choose a scholarly source that is in one area that someone else might not. So, we have a blog post here. It lists some reasons why this particular author feels that Captain Marvel is a superior feminist film-wise than Wonder Woman. So one thing that I will comic book characters, so they can exist in comic books, they can exist in film, they can exist in TV shows. I'm not asking you this time to read a particular comic book. I'm asking you to consider the character overall. So you don't have to read anything this time, but you do need to familiarize yourselves with these characters and conduct some research. Um, so hopefully between these example thesis statements, the example sources, the rest of the information that you have on Moodle, I am hoping that this is all helpful for you. So again, all I'm asking you to do for your topic proposal, include the comic. I'm so sorry, I need to change this. Choose include the comic book characters that you're going to use, a thesis statement you might use, and then the third thing, a list of 2 or 3 things that you might want to discuss, 2 or 3 points that you might have. We will dig into everything else in a little bit more detail. I'll make sure to upload, so I'll upload a couple of things. An example introduction that I have for comic book characters. I will also try to upload a presentation on the outline and the models of argumentation that you will be doing. But I did want to get this up today for you. If you run into any struggles, just let me know. Read through this as carefully as you can. If you have questions, email me. If you don't have questions, I will read your topic proposal on Friday. Thank you guys.